When a rugged cowboy stumbles upon a pregnant woman being sold by her cruel husband, he makes a choice that changes both their lives forever. Briar Ridge was no place for saints. The dusty settlement tucked deep in the canyons of the Sierra Territory was where lawmen feared to go and decency came at a price. That day, Jonah Callahan, 38, leather-skinned from sun and silence, with gray-streaked dark hair and stormy green eyes, was only there to trade for livestock. His black duster hung heavy with trail dust, boots cracked from miles of solitude. But what caught his eye wasn't a Mustang, it was a woman, standing on a raised platform, hands tied in front, eyes empty yet defiant. Her name was Clara May, 26, belly round with child, wearing a torn linen dress and bruises that told stories no one dared ask about. Her auburn hair was matted, but her pale skin glowed against the bruises, her expression numb but burning underneath. A man beside her barked numbers, her husband claiming debts. Jonah's jaw clenched. He didn't speak. He just stepped forward, tossed a sack of silver coins, and said one word, "Mine." The sun dipped low as they rode into the hills. Clara sat side saddle on Jonah's second horse, stiff with confusion and fear. He hadn't spoken another word since the outpost, but his silence wasn't threatening, it was cautious. Clara kept glancing over at him. Who was this man? Why had he bought her? Jonah avoided eye contact, his brows set like carved stone. In the saddlebag between them were apples, dried meat, and a wool blanket. No ropes, no shackles. "I'm not a slave," she finally said. "I know," Jonah replied, low and flat. "You're free now." That night they camped near a stream. Jonah slept under the stars, giving Clara the tent. She wept quietly, clutching her belly. It was the first night in months she wasn't afraid of who might touch her in the dark. By day 3, they reached Jonah's land, a modest wooden cabin nestled in the pine woods near Silver Lake. The place was clean but worn, like its owner. Inside, one bed, a fireplace, shelves of old books, and a rocking chair. Clara hesitated at the threshold. "You'll be safe here," Jonah said. She stepped in, eyes darting to the door like it might close on her, but Jonah never followed her in. He returned only to bring firewood, soup, and water. That first week they barely spoke. Clara watched him from the window. He spent his days mending fences, chopping wood, speaking only to his horse. Still, every night she found food waiting and fresh quilts folded at her bedside. The silence was a quiet that begged to be broken. One morning, Clara surprised herself by stepping out with a cup of tea. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Jonah didn't look up. "Because you needed it. I could have run, you didn't stop me. Freedom's not mine to take." She sat on the porch, the wooden step cold beneath her. "Clara," she said, offering her name like a fragile bird. "My name's Clara," Jonah nodded. Jonah, that was the beginning of something neither of them could name. Clara's nightmares came in waves, harsh gasping reminders of the life she'd barely escaped. One night a scream tore from her throat, jolting her upright. She clutched her belly, heart pounding, eyes wild. The door creaked open slowly and Jonah appeared in the doorway. Hair tousled, shirt half-buttoned, face lined with concern. "You all right?" he asked softly. Clara didn't speak right away. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I thought he found me," she whispered. Jonah stepped no closer, but his voice was steady. "He didn't, he won't." She believed him. There was something about Jonah, an unshakable calm like an old tree that weathered 100 storms. That night he didn't return to the barn. Instead, he sat on the floor just outside her room, rifle across his lap, eyes wide open until morning. When she peeked out at sunrise, there he was, guarding her like a soldier. She said nothing, but for the first time she smiled. As autumn faded and frost glazed the pine branches, Clara grew heavier with child. The mornings turned brisk, their breath visible even indoors. Jonah patched the roof, gathered firewood, and traded with nearby settlers for blankets and dried fruit. His preparations were quiet but thorough. Clara, too, began to change. She no longer sat curled on the bed. She moved with purpose, sweeping, cooking small meals, sewing baby clothes from scraps she found in a chest. Her cheeks regained color, her voice strength. One day, while folding clothes, she found a photo tucked between books, a woman holding a toddler, both smiling. She brought it to Jonah. "My sister," he said, taking the photo gently. "And her boy gone now." Clara didn't ask more, but she understood then that Jonah's silence wasn't coldness. It was grief. The house that once echoed with distance now pulsed with quiet life. Clara spoke more. Jonah listened more. And though they never said it, both began to need the other in ways they hadn't expected. The first snowfall came without warning, thick and soft, blanketing the woods in silence. Clara stood at the window, mesmerized. Snow had always meant fear. Cold nights, locked doors, cruelty. But here it looked like peace. Jonah came in from the cold, cheeks flushed. "It'll get worse before it clears," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "Is it always this quiet?" He nodded. "That's why I chose this place." Clara turned toward the hearth, a tiny smile playing on her lips. "It's beautiful." He glanced at her, and for a brief moment the weight in his eyes lightened. As the snow deepened, they became their own small world. Two people healing by firelight, speaking in quiet tones and gentle gestures. Clara sang to her unborn child. Jonah read old books aloud in the evenings, his voice low and patient. The baby began to kick more often, and Clara would press Jonah's hand to her belly. He never said much, but his calloused hand lingered longer each time. A sense of family began to take root, not from obligation, but from the growing warmth between them, as if the snow had buried their pain beneath it, leaving only something new to grow. As the snow thickened outside, memories stirred inside Clara like unsettled dust. One evening, she sat at the fire, cradling her belly, her eyes distant. "He hit me when I told him I was pregnant," she said suddenly, voice flat. Jonah looked up from his whittling, the flicker of the fire casting shadows on his sharp cheekbones. He didn't speak, just waited. "He said the baby wasn't his, said I was a whore," she continued. "Then he dragged me to that outpost and tried to sell me like I was a horse with a cracked hoof." Her words hung in the air, bitter and shaking. Jonah set his carving down and leaned forward, elbows on knees. "He was wrong," Jonah said quietly. "You're worth more than he'll ever be." Clara blinked, stunned by the sincerity in his voice. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not her father, not the preacher who turned his back on her, and certainly not Troy. She didn't cry. She just nodded slowly and stared at the flames. And Jonah, who rarely touched anyone, reached across the space between them and gently laid a hand over hers. No more words were needed. 3 days later, a knock echoed through the quiet snow. Jonah opened the door with caution, rifle in hand, only to find a shivering boy no more than 7, clutching a tattered blanket and a bag of dried berries. "I'm Finn," the boy said through chattering teeth. "Ma's gone, I got nowhere." Jonah's brows furrowed, but Clara appeared behind him, hand on her belly. She knelt and looked the boy in the eye. "You're safe now, Finn," she said, her voice warm. Jonah hesitated, then stepped aside to let the child in. Over the next few days, Finn adjusted to his new surroundings with quiet resilience. He had straw-colored hair, sunburnt cheeks, and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. He didn't speak of his mother, but he clung to Clara like a second shadow. Clara braided his hair, taught him how to stir soup, and read to him beside the fire. Jonah built him a bed out of scrap wood and made sure he never went to sleep cold. Finn never asked if he could stay, he just did. In the quiet days that followed, the cabin transformed. Laughter, soft and unsure, began to echo off the wooden beams. Clara sang lullabies while Finn helped Jonah chop wood. Meals were shared, stories exchanged, and nights were spent playing simple games by candlelight. Jonah found himself smiling more, not wide grins, but subtle curvatures of the mouth that hadn't surfaced in years. Watching Finn trail behind Clara like a little brother waiting for instruction, Jonah felt something stir, something like hope. Clara, once ghostly and guarded, bloomed in the warmth of routine and safety. Her belly grew heavy, her cheeks fuller, her posture prouder. She no longer flinched at every sound or shadow. One snowy evening, Clara pulled Jonah aside as Finn played with wooden blocks on the floor. "You didn't just save me," she said softly. "You gave me a chance to be someone, a mother, a woman, not a prisoner." Jonah's throat tightened. He didn't know how to respond. So instead he nodded and placed a calloused hand on her shoulder, gentle, steady. The three of them sat by the fire that night, not speaking, just existing together. And somehow that was everything. The winds began to howl one evening without warning. Snow whipped across the trees like ghosts chasing through the woods. Jonah stood outside, securing the shutters, while Finn and Clara watched from the window, concern etched across their faces. Clara winced suddenly, clutching her belly. A sharp pain, not like the others. "It's early," she whispered, panic rising. Jonah returned, snow clinging to his coat. He took one look at Clara's pale face and knew. "It's time?" she nodded, trembling. "I think so." Jonah moved fast but steady. He gathered clean rags, boiled water, placed extra logs by the fire. He spoke to Finn in a low voice, guiding him into the back room with a lantern and a promise. "She'll be okay." Outside, the storm roared. Inside, time bent and twisted with every contraction. Clara gritted her teeth, sweat pouring down her temple. Jonah knelt beside her, his large hands steady, his voice calm. "You're strong," he said, over and over. "You've come this far." Hours passed. Screams echoed, then faded. Then came the cry of new life. A baby girl, red and squalling, placed into Clara's arms by the man who had once known only solitude. The next morning the storm had passed. The snow lay deep and undisturbed around the cabin. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting golden light through the frosted windows. Clara lay wrapped in quilts, her newborn sleeping peacefully on her chest. Jonah brought her tea, his hand slightly shaking, though he hid it well. He'd never delivered a child before, but watching Clara cradle the infant made every moment of terror worth it. "What will you name her?" he asked, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Clara looked down at the tiny face, pale with a hint of peach, dark lashes fluttering in sleep. "Mira," she said. "It means light. She's my dawn." Jonah sat beside her. Finn tiptoed in and stared at the baby with wide eyes. Clara pulled him close, letting him see the girl he'd whispered to through her belly for weeks. "She's our light too," Clara said. For all of us. Jonah didn't speak, but something in him shifted. A tight knot inside unwound, like a fence post finally loosened from hard-packed ground. They weren't just 3 souls surviving anymore. They were 4 hearts healing. Weeks passed and Mira thrived. The cabin filled with the soft sounds of baby coos and toddler laughter. Clara's strength returned steadily. Her steps more assured, her laughter real. She no longer looked over her shoulder when the wind shifted. One evening, as the fire crackled and Mira slept in Clara's arms, Finn pulled a knife from Jonah's workbench and held it up. "What's this scar from?" he asked, pointing to Jonah's exposed forearm. Jonah looked down at the jagged mark. "That one," he said, leaning back in his chair, "came from a rattler in '96. Finn's eyes went wide. "Did you kill it?" "Eventually," Finn giggled. Clara traced a small scar on her wrist. "This one came from a kitchen pot. I was 10. My mother was teaching me to cook." Jonah noticed her voice trembled on the word mother. Every scar had a story: pain, survival, memory. Jonah stood slowly, unbuttoned his sleeve, and revealed a long white scar down his ribs. "This," he said quietly, "came from a fire. Lost someone that day." Clara looked at him, her gaze soft but understanding. She didn't ask who. She just reached out and touched the scar gently. They all carried scars, but here they weren't just reminders of pain. They were maps, trails that had led them to each other. The snow began to melt in April. It didn't happen all at once, just slow drips from the eaves, muddy trails through the pines, and finally, the first bloom of green breaking through soil hardened by months of winter. Clara stepped outside with Mira in her arms, wrapped tightly in a shawl. The baby's eyes fluttered at the sun, her little fingers clenching the air. Finn darted past, chasing a bird with a stick sword and a new kind of joy that only a child who has known fear can feel when he finds safety. Jonah was by the fence, repairing a gate loosened by the cold. He looked up when Clara called out. "She likes the sun," she said with a warm laugh. "I think she's going to be wild." Jonah grinned, actually grinned, and came toward them, brushing dust from his hands. "She gets that from her mother," he said. Clara looked up, eyes narrowing playfully. "You calling me wild, Callahan?" "I'm calling you brave," he said. Their eyes lingered. There was no need to rush what was growing between them. Like spring, it would come in its own time. But it was there now, undeniable, something budding, something real. That evening, Clara sat alone by the fireplace, reading through an old stack of yellowed paper Jonah had given her earlier. They were unsent letters, written in Jonah's rough scrawl. Some addressed to his sister, others to a woman named Evelyn. She read the words slowly, carefully, sensing the weight of the sorrow behind them. "I was too late. I didn't reach you in time. I hope heaven has kinder soil than this land." When Jonah returned from checking the stables, he found her still reading. "You loved her," Clara said softly. He didn't answer right away, just nodded and poured himself a cup of coffee. "She died in a fire," he said at last. "I was supposed to bring her and the boy out of the city. I hesitated. They paid the price." Clara reached for his hand. "You carry them with you. That's not weakness, Jonah." He didn't flinch this time. He squeezed her hand in return. The fire between them was more than warmth now. It was trust. It was honesty earned, not owed. Word traveled slowly in the wilderness, but not slow enough to outrun trouble. One morning, Jonah returned from the general store with a look Clara hadn't seen before. Hard, sharp, alert. "What is it?" she asked, bouncing Mira gently in her arms. "Someone's been asking about a woman with red hair, pregnant. Said her name was Clara." Her heart froze. "Troy," Jonah nodded once. "Could be." Fear returned like a tide. Clara pressed Mira tighter to her chest, her body tense. Jonah stepped closer, his tone even. "We'll be ready. You're not going back to him. No one's taking you or Mira." Clara wanted to collapse from the anxiety. But looking at Jonah, steady and certain, she found steel in herself again. "I'm not afraid of him," she said. "Not anymore." That night, Jonah stayed up sharpening blades and checking ammunition. Clara rocked Mira while Finn clung to her side. This time she wouldn't run. This time she had something to fight for. And someone who would fight with her. Troy arrived 2 days later. Clara saw him first from the window, riding in with 2 men, their eyes scanning the tree line like wolves sniffing blood. He looked leaner, more bitter. But the cruelty in his eyes hadn't aged a day. Jonah met him outside, rifle slung low but ready. Clara stood behind the door, Mira in one arm, a pistol in the other. Finn sat in the loft with a slingshot, his small form silent, tense. Troy dismounted and spat in the snow. "You've got something that belongs to me," he growled. "No," Jonah said. "I don't trade in people." Troy's lip curled. "That woman's my wife. That baby, she belongs to no one," Jonah cut in. "And neither does Clara." One of Troy's men reached for his gun. Jonah fired first, just a warning shot, but it cracked like thunder. The man froze, hand in the air. Troy sneered. "You think you can hide out here forever? Law's on my side." Jonah stepped forward. "Law's 50 miles east. You come another step closer and it'll be your grave that gets dug in this dirt." Something in Jonah's voice made Troy hesitate. For the first time he looked unsure. Cowards always flinched when they met someone with nothing left to lose. Clara stepped outside then, face calm, voice loud. You had your chance to be a man, you failed. This is my family now. Troy turned without a word. He never came back. That night the cabin was quiet again. Not with fear, but with peace. The kind of peace that comes after you've looked your past in the eye and watched it turn away. Clara tucked Mira into her cradle. Finn fell asleep beside the fire, thumb resting on a book Jonah had read aloud. Jonah sat outside on the porch watching the stars. Clara joined him, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. Thank you, she said, her voice soft. You saved yourself, he replied. I just gave you room to breathe. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He didn't move away. Do you ever think we were meant to find each other? She asked. I think we made something good out of something broken, Jonah answered. That's more than most. Silence followed, but it was the good kind. The kind that needed no words, just the shared beat of hearts that had once been fractured but now pulsed in rhythm. Spring melted into summer. The wildflowers returned to the valley. So did the laughter. Jonah built a wooden arch near the lake where pine trees whispered like old friends. Clara wore a dress stitched by her own hand. Mira sat in a basket of rose petals. Finn stood proudly with a slingshot tucked into his belt. There were no guests, no preachers, no choir, just vows whispered beneath sun-dappled trees. I choose you, Clara said, not because I have to, because I want to. Jonah took her hands, weathered and strong. I never believed in second chances, he said, until you. They kissed as the wind blew gently across the water. That day, two broken souls didn't just heal, they became whole. Years passed. Mira grew up chasing butterflies and asking questions too big for her age. Finn, taller now, took to fixing fences and building birdhouses. He called Jonah Pa without hesitation. Clara laughed more than she cried. Her garden bloomed brighter each spring. Jonah, now gray at the temples, spent most days on the porch with a book in hand and his family within arm's reach. They weren't bound by blood. They were bound by scars, by courage, by love. And love, freely chosen, proved stronger than anything they'd left behind. This was never a story about rescue. It was about rebirth. A cowboy who once wandered alone now had a home. A woman once silenced now had a voice. A boy without roots had a name carved on the cabin wall beside a girl born into light. And together they built a miracle. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of love, redemption, and the families we choose.